Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Energy Markets podcast. It is September 22nd. We're near the end of the third quarter, and Brent crude oil is trading at 67.09 this morning, up about 0.5% in early Asian trade. Despite all the dramas, all the noise of the last week, and my gosh, there's been a few. From Russian fighter jets flying over the Baltic NATO states to continued genocide of great proportions in Gaza City. The traumas and the dramas go on. And yet the markets, and certainly the oil market, looks barely interested in it all. Omar Najia, a derivatives trader with BB Energy here in Dubai. Omar, your thoughts this Monday morning after Trump's trip to the US last week and all of the other developments mentioned, equity markets hitting records again, the Fed starting to cut again, oil prices uninterested.
Yeah, I think when oil behaves this way, you kind of got to look at the bigger picture, right? So no market is an island, no market trades on its own, or no market can sustain trading on its own. Oil is the most geopolitically, whatever you want to say, important, manipulated, whatever market. And if the Fed is easing with CPI at 3% in the US, which is extraordinary, and has begun a cycle of easing, you would think that with that kind of inflation, if you need anything to hold lower, you need oil, because if oil doesn't hold lower, then you can't say transitory, you can't say no, it's the Chinese, or you can't say it's the, I don't know what, make up an excuse. So I think they're going to try and hold this oil market where it is, but I think it's almost an impossible task. I think it is an impossible task, because everything else is going to fly, and it's going to fly because there's so much liquidity coming that I think we end the year at like 7,000 for the S&P. Oil is going to rally, I think. Gold is going to rally. Everything that's not nailed down is basically going to rally. So a great flood of liquidity is coming, and you still have people who say, no, it's going to be a recession. It's going to be, you don't have recessions when the Fed is easing, when CPI is 3 point something, and you're running a budget deficit of 7 or 8% of GDP. It's just not possible, whatever happens to the job number. So all they're going to do is cut and reflate and inflate and push liquidity into the market. So bullish the world, mama.
Rad Al-Qadiri, managing partner at 31032 Associates. Rad, I wanted to ask you, if you would, as a kickoff point, for us far away in the outer reaches of the Roman Empire, and looking back at all you citizens in the luxury of Rome, can you tell me how we should think about the events yesterday, last night in Arizona, the memorial for the slain conservative or conservative talking, or whatever the word is for his position, the founder of Turning Point USA, I suppose, is one of his sort of titles. But MAGA seems to have its first saint. How should we, from this distance, digest this moment, this event last night in particular, not the assassination a week ago, which clearly was a traumatic political assassination of some sort, but what about the event last night in a football stadium memorializing this man?
I think it gives you an indication on one level of some of the rhetoric and some of the heated rhetoric that sort of is characterizing the US right now. I think there's been an effort by MAGA, obviously, sort of along with its outrage, along with its sense of deep unease about this, to sort of rally around this message of Charlie Kirk and what he represented, and seeing Charlie Kirk as representative of the attack, the murder of him being sort of an attack on MAGA more generally. I think there's a certain amount of cynicism that goes with it. That it isn't the as I say, that sense of anger, that sense of sorrow, that sense of outrage isn't real. But nonetheless, it's being, I think, carefully played as a way of sort of playing to that crowd and playing to the mob, in terms of the deep, very visceral feeling that's there. So yes, it has its first martyr. MAGA has its first saint, if you want, but I think it goes to a much deeper sort of issue, and that is the degree of polarization and the rhetoric and the policies that come with that. America is a very, very divided country right now. One would argue dangerously so. And events like last night probably do nothing to calm the political mood and the political temperature, rather just exacerbates it and is sort of another step on the way to something that could be rather dangerous.
Look, if I might just follow up on that, because what it also seems to be, and I wanted you to speak of it because I think this sort of gives us a wider sense of relevance, and that is that this assassination of Charlie Kirk, who I have to admit I was barely aware of a week ago as a person and as a movement. But in all of the noise that has come out in the interim, it seems that rather than it being a unifying moment for MAGA, it seems to highlight some of the fractures within MAGA. And Charlie Kirk, as I've seen, some sort of questioning some of the holy grail things of, let's say, the attachment to Israel from the point of view of the United States. He was starting to question we're seeing Marjorie Taylor Greene now sort of create some of the, seen her in alignment with some left thinking podcast shows and so forth, that it does seem that there are fractures here in MAGA land that this moment with Charlie Kirk has highlighted, rather than it being a unified tent. Your thoughts on that, and if that is a correct reading, and if it's relevant or not?
I think it's sort of what you're asking points to something sort of broader. I mean, the MAGA movement, or the Trump movement, if you want to sort of call it, is a fairly broad tent. And there have always been tensions within it between different sort of factions who have different priorities. Donald Trump sits as the sort of conductor of a sort of rather discordant orchestra. And I think, over time, particularly as policy, particularly as you move from opposition to power, you start to move from a situation where sort of everything is rhetoric to sort of things starting to become reality, and the tensions in that movement are there. I don't think any of those people are going to break with the president right now. They're just willing to be critical about certain areas of policy. But I think, they also stand sort of very firmly in a camp that is far, far away from, the Democratic camp in the United States. And, they are, you have battling on that island just as you have battling on the other. The really key point is that they are two islands and they're drifting further apart.
Ehsan Ul-Haq, senior oil analyst, a petroleum economist in Vienna. Ehsan, your thoughts on sort of back to basic supply and demand fundamentals here. This is an oil price, while not moving much, is holding, and I think that is a key point here, that it is holding firmly in the high 60s, despite an OPEC plus policy of increasing supply now, moving soon into its sort of 6th, 7th month. Your thoughts on what the dynamics fundamentals are for the oil market to stay held, even though we're seeing such significant increases from the biggest oil exporting group in the world?
The first thing is that probably demand is stronger than previously expected. If you look at gasoline crack in the US, they are still relatively strong. The summer driving season is over, but people are still traveling. I mean, if you look at stocks in the US, crude stocks are lower than a year ago, actually lower than, I mean, in the past few years. Gasoline stocks are also slightly lower than in 2024. In Europe, in spite of different problems Europe is facing, I mean, in spite of, Russian threats against Poland and Estonia, etc. I mean, economies are not doing as good as in the US, but still, I think they are okay. And I mean, in Germany, there were hopes that economies might recover with new steps taken by the government. But in Asia, for example, I mean, India is still importing Russian oil, even now increasing compared to previous months. China buying both Russian and US oil. So, I mean, if you look at the overall picture, I mean, demand appears to be stronger than previously expected. Supply is increasing, but most of the increase was even before new targets were announced. Some of, I mean, OPEC plus producers, they were already increasing. I mean, today, there was a news story that Iraq is increasing production by another 200,000 barrels per day. So supply is increasing, but has not increased as much as the targets given by OPEC plus. OPEC plus supply is also increasing according to some estimates. I mean, US production will move towards 13.6, 13.7 million barrels per day by the end of this year. Brazil is doing fine. Guyana is doing fine. But probably
That's a lot of oil supply, isn't it? You're saying that the idea that there's less OPEC, there's quota announcements, clearly, quota increase announcements, but there isn't a comparable amount of physical barrels coming into the market.
Yes, I think supply is increasing, but we have not seen any impact of that supply on oil prices. I mean, part of the reason is China buying, stockpiling some crude. I mean, as far as OECD stocks are concerned, they are slightly below the 5-year average, but going towards the 5-year average and might increase by the end of the year. So we will see supply exceeding demand significantly by the end of the year. But as I said, demand has proven to be stronger than expected, and this could mean that probably it has taken time. And then you have geopolitical issues as well. I mean, if you look at Ukraine, if you look at now even Arab countries, they are having doubts about the US. I mean, Saudi Arabia cooperating with Pakistan instead of getting support from the US. So, I mean,
all of these things are somewhat supportive. Despite the sort of the uncertain GDP growth of the world, which has been revised down this year by the World Bank once or twice, but all of these other elements you're pointing to remain supportive for the oil price. Omar, looking at that sort of wave of kind of numerous elements that support the price, sort of stop it from falling further, as highlighted there, Bazan, is there anything in that list that he has mentioned in the commentary there, Hassan has mentioned, that actually could be the vault that pushes it back, above the 70, that breaks it out of this particular window?
Well, I mean, imagine you basically have never traded oil or any market. You look at a graph and you see an all-time high at WTI 130, and you see that since 2021, let's say, it hasn't traded below 55, right? And the price is sitting at 62, right? what would you do? Sell 62 and say, there's going to be liquidity, there's going to be inflation, there's going to be all this kind of stuff. But, between 55 and 62, I'll take my chances for a strategic short and hope for the best. Or do you say, 62 to 130, that's, there's a lot of room to the upside. Everything else is going up. So why don't I buy when other people sell it? So I think that's a big part of what's happening. Supply and demand, man, was invented like in the 1800s when people had, sheep and they were doing like all this stuff with, industrialization, all this kind of stuff. It beggars belief that we still use it now. It's like it's like a snapshot. It's not living or breathing or moving. It's like a snapshot and you ask people like, what's supply? What do you supply? What's your demand? And you try and project it forwards. It's useless. It's absolutely useless. So if you look basically right at this moment, if you look at the price of oil and you look at the price of oil in relation to anything else, if you price oil in French fries, if you price it in McDonald's burgers, or if you price it in gold, or if you price it in Nvidia stock or whatever it is, it's the cheapest that it's ever been, plus or minus, which is why I think you're not seeing money, because oil is basically a financialized commodity. You're not seeing money come along and say, right, we're going to speculate to the downside, let's sell it. Quite the opposite, I think. And I think that, if oil breaks, let's say WTI manages to get around $70, I think you'll see a lot of money come in. I think you'll see a lot of people cling on to the fact that supply is going to be here and all this kind of stuff. And what determines price in oil is money flow. It's not supply and demand. I'll tell you when I use supply and demand. The only time I use supply and demand is when the market is completely cratered. The market is in a complete contango, and basically,
or when your car is empty and you have to go get some oil. The supply is empty. I need to go again fill up my gas. Rad, back to the big tent of the MAGA big tent. It seems that in this big tent is Netanyahu and his vision for the Middle East, green light to do whatever he wants. And also in the tent is Putin to do whatever he wants. Does that present any fractures as we now see Putin, it would appear, advancing his reach into the Baltics, into Poland, with current in the last few days and week, the sort of violation of airspace, drones actually falling out of the sky, shot out of the sky in Poland. Your thoughts on those two major geopolitical faults lines, fractures, power in the MAGA tent, Netanyahu and his vision, Putin and his vision, and now Putin taking that into the Baltics. Is this going to fracture, or is he going to stay happy in the MAGA tent?
I think that's less about the MAGA tent and more about the president and more about how the White House feels about things. I mean, in terms of the MAGA tent, again, there's a schism within the MAGA tent regarding what America first means. Should America involve itself in international war? Should it become more isolationist? Should it become, more unilateral? And that's the debate you're seeing. Is it in Washington's interest, or what is Washington's interest from engaging in a European war? What does it matter, and why would US resources and US efforts be sort of placed into that? That is a European issue, and they should deal with it themselves. So I think that's the way to understand it, as opposed to whether there's a place for Putin. And the reality is that, the president has tried in his inimitable way to sort of engineer some sort of outcome on repeated occasions right now, and has failed to rein in Vladimir Putin, and has failed to rein in the Russians.
Which is obviously, I mean, in one level, Putin's calling it's the bluff, right? It's the taco. Putin has never believed that Trump was ever, other than "I'm disappointed" words. There's no backing. There's no sort of red line point that that Putin believes Trump's going to descend on him. And so,
and that speaks to sort of a lack of joined up thinking when it comes to foreign policy and when it comes to security policy. And, the emphasis on transactionalism. One could argue that sort of Trump's greatest interest in Ukraine is being able to be this peace president that will get him a sort of a Nobel Peace Prize. Beyond that, it's hard to see sort of what the strategic thinking is, if there is any at all, about sort of the long-term US-European relationship and the long-term national security and stability picture in Europe. Israel's a little different. I mean, I think, it's very clear that this administration isn't going to break with Israel no matter what. And the personal relationship between Trump and particularly between Jared Kushner, when he was, the eminent screes advising on Middle East issues, was very close. There is a sympathy for Israel on the US right that really sees Israel as being able to do no wrong. And there are times when you just feel that the United States doesn't want to engage, or this administration certainly, because it's too messy and there's nothing to be gained. So,
but just back to the Putin piece, we've seen in recent days the push by supposed push by Trump to get the Europeans to enforce greater sanctions on Russian oil flows. And there is a bill in the Senate that is basically limiting Trump's ability to give too many gifts to Putin. Can you just speak to that? The Senate's influence on Trump's limited ability to be too generous to Putin, and that there is this sanction on the potential for oil flows that the Senate is threatening all the time.
There is no doubt that, across the political spectrum in the United States, and that includes on the right as well, there are those who are hawks on Russia, and there are those who feel that, there need to be tougher measures on Russia. The reality is, though, that this is an imperial presidency, sort of far more so than sort of many that have come before. And one that, so when it comes to foreign policy, as other policies, believes that it has the mandate to take the decisions that it takes and push them through, irrespective of convention, irrespective of the courts, and in some cases, irrespective of the Constitution. And so, those are limiting factors on the margin. Yes, Trump has talked about, if the US puts tariffs on China and India, if Europe puts tariffs on China and India, the US will follow. And then a week, 10 days later, you get a phone call between the president and and Narendra Modi, where everything is hunky-dory again. India is doing exactly as it pleases, exactly the right thing, and that comes down to transactionalism over tariffs and everything else. So I think it's an order of priority in terms of president's mind. It's about short-term gain in the president's mind, and he's not going to be constrained too much by what the Senate says. But that doesn't mean that you aren't going to continue to get from within the MAGA organization or the right more generally, or across the political spectrum, different views on foreign policy issues. That's a traditional part of US politics.
An extension of that, of course, is Iran, and we do have the United Nations meeting in Iran today, or meeting in New York today, the General Assembly meeting. And apparently the Iranian officials who have come in for that meeting aren't allowed to go to Costco's or something silly like that. But the more seriously, it would appear that after 10 years of the Iran nuclear agreement, that the Europeans and the UN are snapping back the sanctions that were in place previously because of the lack of compliance, according to the UN now and the Europeans, on their complying with that agreement. I mean, it's a complete mess because obviously the US abandoned that years ago. But just in terms of that snapback in sanctions and Iran's ability to continue with oil flow to the Chinese, do you think anything's interrupted by this announcement that indeed the UN will snap back those sanctions in place?
I mean, as far as China is concerned, they will continue to get Iranian oil via Malaysia or whatever. Similarly, now India doesn't care about sanctions against Russian oil flows. So we are in a brave new world where the world is divided. But now every country is looking after its own interests. And what is also happening is that, I mean, Iran says that it's complying fully with the United Nations given, what they asked them to do. And similarly, I mean, Chinese refiners, they don't care about what the Trump administration is saying. So I think that there might be more sanctions against Iran, but does Trump want a total ban on Iranian exports? I don't think so. I mean, if you look at the surplus capacity at present, I mean, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, how much can they add? I mean, total spare capacity is less than 4 million barrels per day. So if very strict sanctions against Iran are implemented, I think oil prices will rise and the Trump base in the US will suffer. And if gasoline prices rise significantly, then it's not good for Trump. So I think that as far as Iran is concerned, Iran is unlikely to stop its exports to China and some of its other allies, and similar to India, which will continue. I mean, now the European Union is expanding the number of tankers which will come under sanctions. But I mean, still, the shadow fleet is big enough to continue to send oil to India. The only thing which can stop Russian exports is drone attacks on Russian infrastructure, which is causing problem in Primorsk. Primorsk is a key export port, and if they cannot export as much as they have planned, then it's a problem. And then with oil prices, if oil prices remain between $60 to $70 per barrel, and the Urals at $2-3 discount to Brent, then I think if oil revenues in Russia go down, then it's a problem for Putin's war machine.
Especially when you consider that the dollar weakness and the strength of the ruble, and it's a double whammy in a way for Putin's income. A lower oil price and a weaker dollar is not happy days in Moscow. Let's go. The survey question which flashed up there while you were talking, San, is I just wanted to get all three of you to comment upon in terms of your views on that. The idea that that the latest, I mean, there's endless, every day it's a different drama headline, but over the weekend, the U.S. Trump administration announcing that the price of the H-1B visa, which is essentially the visa that you need in order to work in Silicon Valley and the high-tech jobs, etc., has been raised from what was a few $100 to now $100,000. It just sort of made me think it's the latest kind of trauma in the Trump 2.0 disruption. And in the bigger question of things, can we get through 4 years of this? We're only 6 months into Trump 2.0. And the question is, can we get through 4 years of Trump disruption without some major snap in global markets or geopolitics? Everything at the moment on the markets front seems to be going up. The geopolitics looks stressful, but not yet breaking. So I just want to get everybody's view quickly on that. Can we get through 4 years without a major snap on the scale of like a 2007, 8, the COVID, that scale of snap? Omar, you're rapping and answering that question.
I mean, if you're looking for like an economic downturn because of Trump, I think you are. I don't think that's going to happen at all. And I think basically people who are bearish don't understand where we are.
I'm thinking more snap than downturn. I'm thinking more break than cyclical. That this global system just will finally crack under this sort of scale of disruption.
No, I mean, there's always a choice, right? The US can either cut spending by like 25% and go into a depression, or it can basically print money as much as it's needed, 9 trillion, 12 trillion. The Fed can start buying all long-dated US bonds, do like the Bank of Japan and own 50% of the debt of the US. So there's choices, but those are the choices that the US will have to make. And it doesn't take a genius to work out that what they're going to do, what they are doing, is basically printing money, liquidity. They're going to print trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars because they have no alternative. They're going to keep pushing rates lower because they can't afford the payment on the interest on the debt. So there is no alternative. So whatever you think is going to happen in terms of a downturn or an oopsie moment, whatever, they're just going to flood the market.
Well,
with
Rad,
money.
let's bring Rad to that. I mean, that in itself is a snap moment, isn't it, Rad? I mean, if you're raising or lowering interest rates as inflation rises and you're breaking the dollar, is the dollar the snap that we're seeing? $120,000, $30,000 Bitcoin tells you that the dollar has already snapped. It's worthless according to the price of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I guess my view is stop waiting for a snap. It's going to happen, it's going to be a gradual erosion, and not that gradual. I mean, it's an interesting question of a snap for geopolitics or sort of geoeconomics.
I mean, we nearly saw a snap in early April, didn't we, when the tariffs were announced and the bond markets went bonkers for a few days. It was a bit like a Liz Truss moment, and then it kind of got sobered up when we stepped back from the cliff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the risk is a slightly different one, Sean. I think the risk is that this happens over a period of time. It's the frog in the saucepan moment. And if you look at where we are compared to where we were when this administration came into office, it looks like a very different world, geopolitically and geoeconomically. Trade has been disrupted. You've had disruptions to sort of, globalization. You've had disruptions to the international standards that have been there for decades. You have crises that are breaking out all over the world. You've had the US bomb Iran. You can keep going through the list of issues. And I think, this is a system that's in transition. This is a US administration that is seeking to sort of introduce a paradigm shift in geopolitics and international.
Maybe Jimmy Kimmel's the snap. I don't know. I mean, I'd say that not jokingly. I mean, I think, is there something like when I'm agreeing with Taylor, or whatever her name is, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I like, geez, the world is turned upside down. I'm nodding my head in agreement with her as a central point on the curtailment of the First Amendment.
Again, I think it's going to be a succession of issues. It's going to be, gradual build-up of issues. It's going to spark outrage. I mean, you talked about the memorial for Charlie Kirk last night. I mean, I'm not sure if any people would have put sort of their bet on Charlie Kirk being sort of the outrage moment for MAGA. Given everything else that's going on. But no, you've got an administration.
Could be the high watermark. It could be the high watermark in some way in the way these things work in contra to, the biggest building in the world is built. The next day there's a global property collapse. It's kind of feels to me more like that kind of moment than there's another mountain for MAGA to climb. Ehsan, last word, very quick to you on this. No 2-to-1, no snap.
I think that the global economy has survived many challenges in the past 10 to 15 years. If you look at COVID, if you looked at problems, even in 2008, the economy recovered then. So I think there might be short-term consequences of what is happening now. The world is divided. Even the extreme right is exporting some of their ideas to Europe, for example. But I think on the whole, the world has always survived these challenges, and I think I am still hopeful that after a short period of some gloominess, we will once again enter a period which is probably calmer than today, and also good for the whole world, not only for a certain dictators or whatever.
Okay. Well, that's some good optimism here. Decline, boil the frog rather than shoot him in the head. I don't know which is worse, which is better, but nonetheless, that's the state of play here this morning on the 22nd of September, beginning of the week. Oil prices looking nonchalantly uninterested in much, relatively unchanged, 0.5% up, 0.5% down. Anything there that will snap them into a different reality. Thank you so much, Rad Al-Qadiri, sitting there in Washington. Great to have your insights as always. Ehsan Ulhak in Vienna, and Omar Najia in Dubai. Around the world in 30 minutes. Nobody else does it like